welcome. Good to see you here. This is a sort of overview of the Master of Architecture. I think we all know these kind of architectural. Like here, you see a Farnsworth House from East van der Rohe, these iconic houses and iconic buildings that have governed the idea of architecture for the past decades, conceptually driven. But even more than usual, architecture has a tendency to be always in a sort of a state of crisis, maybe even a little bit more than usual, because of many different reasons. Architecture is somehow in a state of crisis, which is for an architect always a sort of an issue in the sense that it has probably stressful situation and negative impact, but it's also always an opportunity. So in that sense, we take this at the KU Leuven, we try to see, and I think architects globally do this, try to find ways to deal with this situation as a challenge for architectural inspiration and for trying to find change, promote change. So we have some kind of short mottos that somehow help us in formulating these things. This is it's a German idiom, but at the same time, I can translate it as when that's the solution, I want my problem back. So in that sense, I think this is a general attitude that you will find in different studios. That besides finding new solutions for existing problems, what somehow seems to be the default stance of architecture, one might think. We've also already seen in the past, and especially now, that problematizing existing solutions is also a part of what we teach in the studio. So like it's not only problem solving, which is of course very useful, but it's at the same time developing a critical eye, developing to ask the right questions. A good formulated question, in a certain sense, solves itself in time. So it's good to think about what kind of issues, of what kind of questions architecture can solve, and how to deal with these questions. So the main task of the Master of Architecture is actually develop and substantiate your position within the field of architecture. It's a very general statement, but it's actually quite different, especially in our school. We are consciously making a difference between the bachelor and the master. In this sense, the bachelor is mainly focused on discovering architecture and trying to become aware of the means and the mechanisms of the discipline and the different subdisciplines within it. In the master, we mainly focus on trying to find a more personal position within that field that you've started to discover. So in that sense, of course, learning learning how architecture works is always a part of this, but the main part is to develop your own position, your own active practice, because we are absolutely convinced, and I think reality proves this, that there's many different practices, that architecture is always widening its perspective on the world, in the sense that there's different building practices, there's also different sub practices or more marginal practices. We can see that many architects develop products or smaller scale objects. They tend to move towards more artistic interventions. Some are more conceptually or have a critical practice. So I give some examples. This is the project of Xavier de Geyder. It's a building project for a school. but this is also a part of a school. This is by BC Architecture, where the focus is completely different. In that sense, it's more of a story about materials and acting locally together with participating with participatory forces, like working together with the people there. We have also very typical practice is Philip van der Mare, who works together with an artist who has made an interior of a house here that is somewhere in between of a design object and an architectural experience. So there's a lot of very elevated focus on detail here, which is quite different than in the previous example. Or for example, here is another Belgian practice that is quite known for reusing material, and it's called Rotor. And we see here a project from 2012 where they temporary for a short period used an abandoned concrete building near the docks in Ghent and cut some holes in it and made an exhibition in it. So in that sense, that's a once again another different approach. Here we see also a quite interesting practice you might have already heard from, this forensic architecture, where the tools that architects develop specific capabilities, specific skills. I think one of the most important is to think synthetically, to think on different levels together. I think we need to sharpen this capacity, but it's not only in buildings that we have to think on artistic, structural, functional, cultural, on many different levels together, and then without knowing everything, already make a sort of a proposal for a design. These things, these skills have certain tools, and if you combine them, you have a sort of a tool set that you could say that architects use. And forensic architects, they don't build buildings, but they use these tools, this spatial intelligence that an architect develops to explore events, historic events, and try to find the truth based on evidence that is all lying all around on the internet. For example, here the German colonial genocide in Namibia was studied in 2024. So that's a long time after the event happened, but by analyzing all the pictures that were online or available, not only online, also in archives, they managed to reconstruct exactly, rewrite history in a sense, but based on absolute facts. So in that sense, it's a completely different practice than the others shown before. So in that sense, just to show, of course, you probably already know this, but within this field and even a broader field of practices, we try to find elements to propose to you to develop you and to take a position within this field. Another simple, that's maybe a personal motto, but it's also something that we embrace in the school, is I would prefer not to, as a sort of a motto. Maybe some of you have read Melville's Bartleby. It's about how to constructively refuse an offer, in a sense, if you really don't feel good by it. And it's strange to talk about this, but in architecture, we have developed, like, how should I say it? So that you have to somehow always accept the challenge. But for the first time in like maybe 10 years ago, the first time the student came to me and he said, I like architecture and I'm really glad that I studied, but I don't want to build, for example. This was an extreme example for me that we never encountered before. And then I thought, yes, but this resistance is really interesting in that sense. That immediately, if you say this, I would prefer not to build. Then if you formulate it like this, there's immediately the question coming: are there still conditions under which you would like to build, or what are these limit conditions that somehow block you from giving over? And this discussion, I think this is also an important thing we try to stimulate in the studios, like um, even if architecture has many ethical questions, there's still a need for housing, there's still need for a better urban space. So in that sense, if nobody engages with this task, we have a problem. So in that sense, we hope that even a critical reflection on these topics, and then we might discover situations in which in a more ethical way or a more ecological way, so we can develop new projects. I don't know if this makes sense, but that's sort of the context that we see as a content wise. All this is placed within an educational environment that is 2 years. You probably know this. It's 120 credits, in which design plays a central role. Just as I said before, it's through designing and through the development of designs that you do this reflection, develop these skills. Of course, there's also theoretical courses, and there's also electives. So but designs plays a central role. There's 3 studios of 14 credits, and there's 1 master thesis of 30 credits. So in a total, this is 60% of the total amount of credits. This educational environment of the studios, where you could say we are quite a big school. There's quite a lot of studios. Last year's there was this feeling of developing as much studios as possible, in a sense to have a very broad to cover a very broad field of topics. Since 2 years, we have structured these topics within 3 engagements. They're still under development to a certain extent, but they're called craftsmanship, urban culture, and mediating tactics. These are 3 parallel streams that give an accent to your curriculum, but they all lead to the same diploma of master in architecture. So in that sense, this is a sort of a community with a different focus. Just to connect with the previous story, that we see that the field of practices within architecture is quite wide. To help you already take a slide position within that field. So craftsmanship, I just reduce it to a one-liner. There's online, you will find more material about this, more detailed. But if I ask the coordinator of the engagement craftsmanship, he says that the essence of these studios is that they somehow relate to the idea that architecture resides in the act of making. So it's the craftsmanship and focuses on making, building. You see a sort of in the background now, sort of a selection of studios that were organized last year. While urban cultures, as the name suggests, is more relational. It's the architecture resides in its relations. Is there the motto? We could say that to make it less abstract, there's different streams of points of interest, and one stream is like designing architecture from departing from the context by studying the context. Another line is more of yeah, how would you say, social problematics like aging, or more cultural situations like gender diversity, or the different elements that could, what is their impact in relation to architecture. So how can they, in that sense, urban culture has these different things that are, one could say, traditionally belong a little bit to urban design, and at the same time also really departing from cultural relations that architecture, the built object of architecture, has with its surroundings. It's contextualized. It's not. It's looking at how the built reality impacts its surroundings, and in physical or also cultural ways. And then the third is called mediating tactics. We've heard that for most of the people, this name is not so clear, and we're working on reworking it. But it's like the main object is architecture is an expanded field, meaning that just as I said before, that there's many different practices within, if you look at the field of architects that are working and articulating in the world, and articulating themselves as architect. And this ranges from, as I said, scenographers, artists, architects that have a more of an explorative or experimental approach. So in that sense, architecture, yeah, especially also in the digital field, where you can imagine AI and all the modern developments having an impact on what an architect can do with it, or how it can become architecture in itself. So this is maybe sort of a sketch of the three engagements, where you could say you have one that is focused on the making, one on a contextually on context and contextualizing, and one where it's looking for alternative practices, which is, of course, every practice in architecture is an alternative practice because they're all unique in a sense. But so in that sense, it's focusing on these three streams. This educational environment where you have the engagements as a sort of a design, where the design is clustered. There's, of course, also a theoretical component. History, theory, and criticism is one part of this. It's 12 to 18 credits, building techniques 12 to 18 credits, and professional practice is 10 credits. I'm I'm not. I went quickly over the 12 to 18. This means that the theory courses for building technique and history, theory, and criticism are organized in blocks of 6, and you get 2 of history, theory, and criticism if you choose. So you have a fixed course that everybody gets, and then you get an optional course depending on the engagement you have chosen. So building techniques is, you get an extra 6 credits for building techniques in craftsmanship, because there, for the making and for the building, it seems like a sort of a double accent to have to focus on the building techniques. And oops, I pressed on the wrong button because I heard somebody a beep. And then this history, theory, and criticism seems to be for the 2 other engagements an added element. So to be just clear, in the beginning of your enrollment, if you would choose to enroll, there is an option to choose an engagement, and by choosing the engagements, you also choose for an additional optional that you can choose which one, but it's going to be within the fields of building techniques. For if you choose for the engagement of craftsmanship, it will be within the field of history, theory, and criticism if you choose for the 2 others, namely urban cultures and mediating tactics. Besides a specific, so you have designing and theory, and then you have electives that can have, they're separate because they're both. They can be a deepening elective in a sort of a theoretical or in a design-related field. They can be deepening, or they can be broadening. In that sense, there are different kind of electives, meaning, to be concrete, that you can choose or electives of 4 credits that have a sort of a small design exercise, ranging to a very theoretical element or method of approaching the subject, and at the same time it can range from being really going more specific on one subject, or going quite complementary to what you've already had. So you can move. There are some courses that are organized in other faculties. There's some courses that you can go into practice to do an internship, to give some example. But there's equally a very internal within the school. There's also like a teacher who has done a studio on a certain objects, for example, smart models in 3D modeling, and then has a 4 study points elective to go really deep into that subject, and for example apply space syntax to it. Just to give an example, these are maybe all words that you know, maybe not, but just to show that it's a wide field that goes that tries to offer many different options. That's why it's called electives, of course. Then this educational environment that we talked about now, that it's what is also specific about it is that we have 2 campuses, one in Brussels, one in Ghent, meaning that these are 2 locations, but within these locations there are even more buildings that we use. So in that sense, normally you choose for, because Brussels and Ghent are, let's say, close, but not really that close. It's not. So it means with train you can be there in 30 minutes, and as a student you have a very interesting rate to make this travel. But we thought it was best that you chose for one campus where you are officially assigned to, but all the courses are multi-campus, saying that, meaning that you can always choose for them, especially in the masters. There's, for example, for the studios, it's clear that if you have a studio that you really want to engage with, and it's not in the campus that you are officially enrolled, you can choose to go to the other campus and follow that course there, of course. It's multilingual, meaning that you choose normally in the same way for a main language. Most international students choose for English. But we also have a Dutch program. So in that sense, it's possible to stay within that one language. So if you say which often is the case, that people that come from abroad don't speak Dutch, there's a way to finish your studies without the need for a Dutch studio. The other way around, for the Dutch-speaking studios, the students, they often also choose English-speaking studios. So in that sense, we also have, especially for the studios, we have already quite a few bilingual or multilingual studios. So in that sense, just to be clear, don't worry that that you will have to learn Dutch quite quickly. There is an English program, but be aware that some studios, the number is quite small, but that some studios only offer Dutch. So these will not be, but they're marked in the course, and I think it's like only very, very few. But there's then a larger number of bilingual studios. You will see that you can choose, that you're together with people who speak Dutch, but that the teacher talks to you in English and talks to the other one in Dutch. And we organize the sessions in certain ways, so to get some kind of mix anyhow. So maybe too much words altogether, but I think that was the most important part of what I had to say